Welcome to the first official episode of the D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder, joined by Matt Snyder, and we're excited to get into our first official episode after dropping our episode 0 intro episode. And first, I'd like to just thank the D3 Hoops community. It's been really cool to see how quickly we've been getting some follows on Twitter and people finding us on YouTube. So thank you for that. We're excited about the project, but I think that makes it even more exciting to drop the first episode and already have a little bit of traction going. You can follow us on Twitter at D3 Datacast if you haven't already, and we would appreciate a subscribe here on YouTube. And as we get into our first actual content episode here, if you like what we've done, hit the thumbs up button. And if you didn't, hit the thumbs down button and leave a comment. Let us know what we could do better. So, Matt, how are you?
How you doing, Zach? Glad to be here. Excited for episode 1 officially to begin.
Yes.
But while we start here, you're looking like you're in a different location this time. Where are you?
Yes, here we have the Nurmi Center at Finlandia University. And I want to kick this one off just because I think there's going to be a tendency to focus on kind of the top teams in Division III. And then it's important to remember how big Division III actually is, with over 400 teams competing in men's basketball. And Finlandia is a special one to us as Calvin alums and following the Michigan Intercollegiate Athletic Association, because while that conference has 7 schools in Michigan, our state actually has 8 Division III schools, Finlandia being the one exception to the MIAA schools. So props to Finlandia. I also have a little bit of Finlandia University swag here.
And
so go Lions. And then, as a Detroit football fan, the way most Sundays go, this hat comes in pretty handy on Sundays as well. So there we go. All right, so we have our first actual topical episode, and we thought we'd start off by kicking out some initial projections for the 2022-23 D3 season. And so, Matt, you want to give us just a brief introduction to efficiency ratings and kind of these numbers that we're going to be tracking through the season?
Yeah, for those who followed my mostly on my Twitter account for D3 basketball, the last few years have probably come across my efficiency ratings. I've kind of stolen the Ken Pomeroy method. Ken Pomeroy does Division I efficiency ratings at kenpom.com. I've tried to replicate that for Division III and just post those online. It's a fun way to kind of compare strength of teams and try to put them in order, top to bottom. But to start the year, I always like to give a starting point, a basis line for all the teams. You could set up a projection system and just put everyone in the middle and then let the season play out and see how that goes. I like to put a baseline for teams just based on some recent history of where they've been, and then start from there. And the projections that I use to start the season will funnel out by the middle of December this year. So by the time teams have played about 10 games, you won't be seeing any preseason weighting in their numbers anymore. But for those who are new to the efficiency side of things, it's a pretty simple formulaic calculation just based on box score data. And really the idea here is on offense, how many points are you scoring per possession every time you have the ball? How can you turn those into points? Minus how often are you allowing your opponents to turn their possessions into points? And one thing that's important to note is this is tempo free. So it's not just who scores the most points or the least points. Because you could run a Grinnell or Greenville type system, rack up a whole lot of points, but not necessarily have a top tier offense. You might be a team that's more deliberate, slow paced, but heck, you're scoring 1.3 points per possession, and it's just hard for the other team to keep pace. So that's kind of the baseline of the efficiency ratings. If you want a larger description, if you go to the blog site that I still post the data to, which I think the link will be in the description below, you can get a text-based description, and then I'm always happy to answer questions online. Feel free to either tweet at the D3 Datacast or tweet at me, and I'll maybe help you out there if I can.
Right. So what we'll do here is we'll go through, a few teams, but obviously it would be impossible and probably not very interesting to go through all of Division III. So All the data will be out there for people to look at if they want to see where a particular team stands. And like you said, this is just based on historical data over the last couple of seasons or 3 seasons, and we'll be updating as the season progresses. And eventually by mid-December, it will be entirely based on just that season's results.
Yeah, 100%. So just to set the stage, here's how the top 10 ended up last year. Plus, I threw in Elmhurst and Wabash, who ended up in the Final Four. So just the way to read this chart, I have their ranking and then their offensive efficiency rating. This turns out to be points per 100 possessions. And then defensive efficiency rating, points allowed per 100 possessions. And then the margin is just the difference between those two. So in general, how many points are you better than the average opponent for every 100 possessions you would play? So here's the top 10 plus those 2 other Final Four teams. So just right off the bat, one interesting thing to note is that Randolph-Macon was head and shoulders above everyone else by the data. They were 9 points of efficiency margin, better than Wisconsin-Oshkosh by the computer's speculation. And then you can see there wasn't even 9 points between Oshkosh and Elmhurst, who ended up at number 20. So there was a huge gap there. Those of us, you and I, were at the Final Four. We saw Randolph-Macon take care of some other very good teams. There was no doubt they were the best team there, and the computer saw that as well. Just to note, although Elmhurst and Wabash did have great tournament runs, end up in the Final Four, the way I run my data, it doesn't see a game in March any differently than a game in November. A very reasonable projection system could take that into account and weight more recent games more heavily. Mine doesn't do that, so someone could quibble with that. That's fine. By the end of the year, you could say Wabash was definitely better than the number 31 team. But I just wanted to call out, this looks at a holistic view of the season and weights every game the same, no matter if it's a tournament game or a non-conference tournament over Thanksgiving or whatever.
Right. And it's important, maybe we can note here that this is just one method, one set of rankings that you've kind of been working with over the last several years. There are different ways of doing it, and actually in future episodes we're planning on kind of discussing some different rankings, different methods of evaluating teams, and how those all kind of fit into the D3 picture. So that's coming, a little preview of coming attractions. But for right now, we're going to focus on your efficiency ratings.
Yeah, MasseyRatings.com also does Division III ratings. We talk about that a lot. His methodology is different than mine. A lot of things match up, but some things don't, and those are always interesting to look at as well.
Right.
So now moving over to the preseason ratings, we talked a little bit about what goes into a preseason rating on my system. So this is just what I do. I take the last 3 seasons of efficiency data and I weight them. Last year is more highly weighted than the year before and the year before that. But that's the 3 years of data that I'm looking at. And I do that a little bit to get some program trajectory built in there. So we know UW Stevens Point had maybe an odd season for them last year. Their record was quite poor. But this type of projection system might help them in the preseason because they're usually stronger than that. So this might buoy them up a little bit because we might expect a program like UW Stevens Point to bounce back a little bit. So that's one of the reasons I picked that kind of method. I also throw in some regression to the mean. We don't know what's going on with all these teams. So I throw in a chunk of NCAA average into the mix. So that'll kind of suck teams toward the middle a little bit, again, for the preseason until we start getting new data in there. Also important to note, my computers don't know anything about players or player turnover. Don't know that there's a bunch of grad transfers coming into a team, or that all of the starters are gone from a team that made a deep tournament run. So obviously, if you see a team ranked too high or too low, know that that's probably why, and you are free to adjust mentally where appropriate there. And this just acts as anchors for an early season result. I don't, you could just wipe everything blank. Everyone's at 0, and then after 1 game, after 2 games, you start throwing them in. You could hold rankings entirely until maybe mid-December or January and not show anything. I've chosen to augment early season results with these preseason ratings because it usually makes a little bit more sense. A team might blow out a weaker team in the early season, and it just takes a while for that data to iterate out without maybe knowing that the team they blew out wasn't all that good. So just acts as an anchor for the early season. Like I said, about 10 games in, you'll start seeing current season result take over and the preseason ratings being wiped away. So with all of that spiel out of the way, here's a look at what I've come up with, what my computer's come up with of the top 25 teams and where they sit in terms of projected efficiency margin. And then I threw a few notable teams in there at the end. But right off the bat, easy to know that Randolph-Macon, although they're losing a few key players, again, players aren't taken into account here, but they're still projected to be the top team, and quite significantly, by the way. That margin there between Marietta, who is number 2 in the projections, 7 points of efficiency margin. That 7 points will take you from number 2 all the way to, I believe, number 35, Dubuque. So there's a huge gap there again between number 1 and number 2. So you can see this, it might be as helpful to look at kind of like natural tiers of teams rather than just what the number is and where teams rank.
Right. It doesn't make sense to haggle over Christopher Newport being number 6 instead of number 2, because based on the efficiency margin difference, it's pretty negligible.
Yeah, those teams you could think of as quite even. And you can see there's quite a few log jams in there, including like the last 8 spots or so, all coming in at a 12 efficiency rounded. Obviously, there's some decimal point differences in there that I'm not showing, but it's all tight. And how teams get here is interesting too. I just want to call out Yeshiva at number 5. That's going to look quite high. Like I said, I'm using the last 3 years of data, and they've been a very good team for the last 3 years, but never number 5. But basically, you're existing in that kind of top 25 world for 3 years. Very few other teams have also done that. So them being one of the few teams that have existed in that space, the computer likes to see that and puts them in the top 5. Now, you and I knowing that team, they're going to have to replace some significant players. Ryan Terrell's not going to be there anymore. So we'll see what goes on there.
Gabe Leifer. Yep.
Yeah. Several others, right?
Right.
And then, like I said, I added a few notable teams. Wabash coming in at number 40 on the projection. Our alma mater, Calvin, number 41, right behind. And then I placed Chapman in there at number 100. I kind of arbitrarily used the top 100 as a cutoff between kind of more averagey teams and good teams. So that's kind of what an average team might look like. The computer is seeing Chapman that way. They were a fringe tournament contending team last year. So they were had some good quality there. But kind of that's what the projection sees them as, kind of that cutoff line between kind of good teams and more average teams. And then
with the margin of 5 at Chapman there, you see that's kind of the point where you get a little bit more towards neutral in terms of your ability to score buckets and your ability to to play defense and to deny buckets.
Yeah, and I don't show it here, but they're number 100 at +5. You could kind of assume number 300 might be -5. So that's kind of a 200 team band between +5 and -5 or so. And that's about half of Division III right there. Mm-hmm. And then our friends of the week, Finlandia, I wanted to highlight them here kind of for an unfortunate reason. I didn't intend to highlight them specifically, but 417 was the number of teams that were in my spreadsheet to start the year. And unfortunately, they were at the bottom of the list at -22. So that's going to be the other end of the spectrum.
So we'll look for Finlandia to be one of the biggest movers up the board this year.
Hopefully so. Yeah, sure. They'll maybe be $3.99 by the end of the season or something like that, and that'll be good to see. So after that, I kind of just took a look at some of those movers. Like you said, maybe look for Finlandia to come up the board during the season. I wanted to look at teams who moved around a lot between the end of last season and where the projection has them for a variety of reasons. So these aren't the biggest movers necessarily, but here's kind of a collection of some of the movers. And I kind of wanted to talk through them a little bit. Whitworth, traditionally a very strong team. They were good last year. They're quite good, but they ended up as number 48 in my computer rankings. The projections put them right back into the top 25, so they're going to maybe gain 27 spots between end of last season and this season. And then two teams who had very strong runs in March ended up in the tournament. Case Western hosted a sectional pod. So they ended up in number 28, Keene State number 26, but both of them are falling back into the mid 50s. Still a good ranking. But they don't have that history as much of being a top 25 team. So the way I do the projections, it pulls them back a little bit and wants to see a little bit more from those programs. A huge mover up the list, 100 spots, Nebraska Wesleyan. After finishing more average last year at 183, they're being pulled back into the top 100. And they're not that far removed from being a top 10 team. So we're still getting a little bit of that data in there. And maybe there's some actual reasons to think that they're a strong program as well, but the projections are actually high on them as well. I think they were maybe a top 5 team in last season's preseason projections, and obviously they didn't finish up that way. And then Trinity of Texas, they're projected to be more of a number 100 team. They had a very good program last year, finished number 52. We saw them dominate Calvin in the Christmas break. That was not a fun game to watch on stream, but they were just stifling in that game. But they are another team that doesn't have that history quite as much of being a top team, so they're going to fall back maybe toward that line of number 106 between kind of more average teams and those good teams. A big mover in the positive side, John Carroll. They had a un-John Carroll-like season last year, finishing 225 in the efficiency ratings. They're being pulled up 71 spots to number 152 or 154. And I think we can expect big things from John Carroll this year and maybe exceeding that projection even. And then from the CCIW, Milliken falls 110 spots from last season to this season's projection. They had one of their better seasons that I can remember last year. They were number 100 in the final efficiency ratings, but they've traditionally been, they're in the CCIW, which is a good league. They've been more toward the bottom of that league, but that puts them more towards Division III average than Division III good teams. So we'll see what the year has for Milliken, but the computer's expecting them to regress a little bit, and so we'll see what actually happens.
All right. Again, so just important to know, this is just a starting point for the season. We see here teams that historically, or at least over the past 3 years, have performed one way, might get helped or hurt depending just on how that history goes.
Yeah, so, and I should probably correct myself. I probably said the computer thinks this is what they will do. It really just says this is what they've done more recently and averages those out.
Right. And then as this year's data gets entered in, it'll adjust, and as things, does it look more like the random good year or the random bad year or the historical average? And then by mid-December, none of that actually even really matters because it's entirely based on what teams have done for the current season. So,
yep, we'll see it. We'll see it by Christmas what teams are actually doing.
Right.
So then you and I wanted to make picks. We each picked one team that was going to exceed the computer projections. Should be easy, but you want to take your pick first?
Yes, I will. So just right out of the gate, I know we covered this in the intro episode. We're not here just to be Calvin Homer. So right out of the gate, my pick is Hope. Going with the rival. But actually, as you look at the numbers here of how they finished the last 3 seasons, I think it's really interesting because we talk about the computer doesn't know who's returning, who's not returning. We don't have a built-in D3 recruiting star ranking that is getting plugged in for newcomers. But as I looked at the numbers here and the data behind the scenes that's going into Hope's projection at number 83 for this year, it was really interesting to me because you have 2020 where they finished number 185, and as people who follow D3 hoops know, Hope is one of the big name programs. It was a very uncharacteristic year for them to finish sub 500. So that 83 is still being dragged down by what happened 3 years ago. And then you saw improvement to 73 for 2021, and then to 56 to finish the year last year. So I actually not only look for them to improve upon or finish better than the number 83, ranking here to start the season, but to be better than the number 56 they finished last year. Because as you see, 3 years of improvement coming into this year, they're a team that returns a lot, right? So they have defending MIAA MVP Evan Thomas is coming back, fellow first teamer Clayton Dykehouse. So they've got that core group of guys who've already proven it at this level coming, into their fourth year. You see the improvement year by year. And so it was just kind of interesting to see that improvement leading up to, kind of a culmination for at least, a couple of all MIAA first teamers year. I think that if I was a top 25 voter, which I'm not, you're not, but I think Hope would be in my top 25. I think probably they're set up for that kind of season. And, but we've seen strange things over the last couple of years in the MIAA. I feel like this is the third straight year we're going to be going into the year with like a really solid favorite. Albion had a solid year and returned everything 2 years ago. And then Trine came out of nowhere, had a spectacular season, went into last season. Trine was the head and shoulders favorite. And then, Hope won the league. Kelvin also got the Pool C bid, Trine's out of the tournament. So we'll see what actually happens. But I look at the numbers here and I think Hope is really primed to exceed their position.
Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, I think that's a good pick. They're probably going to be a team to be reckoned with this year. My pick I hinted at earlier is going to be John Carroll. I guess we're sticking in the old Great Lakes region here, the new Region 7. John Carroll out of the OAC. 3 years ago, the number 40 rating was more of what we're used to seeing from John Carroll. They're a team we see in a top 25 team as often as not. And then kind of during COVID and last year, they had some years that they're not used to. I think they were maybe 500 during the 2021 COVID year. But I guess their schedule came out not great because they ended up with a number 300-ish finish. Last year, they were kind of number 225. We just didn't see much out of them. But the reason I'm making this pick is they are evidently having a bevy of grad transfers come in. I believe they're all grad transfers from the Division II and Division III level. And I'm not intimately aware of all those players or their roster as a whole, but I do know that Ryan Whitnable, who follows the OAC as much as anyone and runs that Great Lakes Invitational Tournament, he is a top 25 voter, and he has kind of tweeted his consideration for them as a top 25 and maybe top 10 team coming into the year. So we'll see where he puts them. But I think a lot of people are expecting John Carroll to have a lot of good players. So we'll see how that all gels together. But either way, with or without those, I expected that program to rebound. So much above the number 154 projection, I think we'll see John Carroll more like a top 25 team than a number 150 team.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So that kind of wraps up at least the starting point for the efficiency ratings. We'll see how they develop and morph over the course of the year. It'll be interesting to see which teams are separating themselves and really, kind of get that picture of who the top teams actually are based on the current season in Division III as we go along. So thanks for bringing us through those and kind of setting the table for the season, which is kind of just around the corner, but maybe not quite as coming as quickly as the D3 hoops fans out there would like. But so that wraps up episode number 1. We again really appreciate the feedback we've gotten so far, all the quick follows on Twitter. You can find us there at D3 Datacast. And just really encourage you, if you've enjoyed this, if you're a D3 Hoops fan, if you want to learn more about D3 Hoops, hit the subscribe button so you get that new video right to your feed. And give us a thumbs up if you like the video. Thumbs down. Leave us a comment. Let us know what we could do better or what you'd like to see in the future. And so one other thing we have, completely optional, but if you'd like to support the show, we have an online tip jar set up at streamlabs.com/D3 Datacast. And if you'd like to ask a question or request a background, for me. Leave it as a message in the Streamlabs section with your donation, and we would love to make it part of the next show. So looking forward to this. Again, it's nice to have the first official episode, and yeah, I'm excited for the season already.
Yeah, students will be on campus in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, it'll be another 2 months or so before we get games after that. But I'm excited for D3 hoop season as well. Love to participate in the conversations there. If you have questions for us, the viewers, you can tweet them at D3 Datacast or leave them in that Streamlabs link, and we'll be happy to read them on air.
All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job, team.